A family photo from 1895 looked completely normal at first, but when they zoomed in on the young girl, something unexpected appeared. The heat and humidity in New Orleans made everything cling to you. Paper stuck to fingers, shirts stuck to skin, and even the air felt heavy. Dr. Vivian Rousseau wiped her forehead and adjusted the desk fan in her small office at the Louisiana Historical Archives. It was August, and the city felt endless, but the climate-controlled vault where the photos were stored stayed cool. She had spent 3 months organizing the TME collection, which held hundreds of photos, documents, and items from one of the oldest African-American neighborhoods in the country. Most pieces had been donated by families clearing out attics and old estates. History that could have been thrown away was saved here. Vivian opened a mahogany box lined with worn velvet. Inside was a single photo in an ornate gold-colored frame, surprisingly well-preserved. The picture showed 3 people in a stylish parlor. Heavy curtains framed a window, and a patterned rug lay across polished wooden floors. A man and woman sat in formal chairs, dressed in elegant clothing. Between them stood a girl around 10 years old wearing a white lace dress and holding a book. Her hair was styled in soft curls. Everything about the picture showed pride and success. It was clearly a formal portrait, the kind families paid good money for in 1895. She turned the frame over. A handwritten label read, "The Beaumont Family, November 1895. Faro Photography Studio, Royal Street." She recognized the name. Armand Faro had been one of the top photographers in New Orleans during the late 1800s, especially among the city's Creole community. Vivian placed a photo under proper lighting and examined it with a magnifying glass. The details were sharp, textures, book titles on a shelf, fine patterns in the clothing. Then she noticed something near the girl's collar, a faint mark above the lace. She leaned closer. The shape made her pause. She set up the high-resolution scan of the archives had purchased a few months earlier. It could capture details far beyond what the eye could see. She scanned the photograph at full resolution and opened it on her computer. When she zoomed in on the girl's neck, her heartbeat quickened. Where the lace parted slightly, she could see marks on the child's skin. Vivian adjusted the lighting and contrast. The marks came into focus. They weren't shadows or printing flaws. They were scars, raised lines forming clear shapes. They looked like letters or numbers. She felt a tightening in her stomach. In her research on slavery, she had seen branding scars before, marks forced on people by enslavers to claim ownership. But this photo was from 1895, 30 years after slavery ended. A child born around 1885 should not have marks like that. She zoomed in further. She could see an M and either a 7 or a J. The scars were fully healed, suggesting they were made years earlier. The family in the portrait looked wealthy and respected. Everything about the setting reflected success and dignity, except for the scars hidden under the girl's collar. Vivian opened her notes. Beaumont Family, 1895. Possible identification marks on child. Timeline inconsistent. Research needed. She searched birth and family records looking for answers. Her research led her to the Louisiana State Archives in Baton Rouge. She drove there with copies of the photo and her notes. Many records from the 1880s and 1890s hadn't been digitized yet, so she needed the physical documents. She ordered every record for anyone named Beaumont or Beaumont in Orleans Parish between 1880 and 1900. After an hour, a clerk brought out several boxes. Vivian started with birth records. She found a child named Marie Claire Beaumont, born November 3rd, 1885, to Etienne and Josephine Beaumont at a home on Esplanade Avenue. The girl in the photo looked about that age in 1895, so the timeline matched. She continued searching. Etienne appeared in the 1890 city directory as a merchant and property owner. Josephine showed up in newspaper notices for community and charity events. They were an established family. But nothing explained the scars. Vivian then checked adoption records. She found a document from March 1891 showing Etienne and Josephine legally adopting a girl named Marie Claire, age 6. The record listed her origins as unclear. This didn't match the birth certificate that named them as her parents. Something was off. Property records revealed that Etienne had bought a small house in Plaquemines Parish in January 1891, just months before the adoption. The land wasn't useful for farming, yet he paid a large amount for it. Vivian requested records from the parish. She also searched the photography studio's archive records. Farrow's appointment books still existed. In his 1895 book, she found an entry for the Beaumont portrait along with a note. The mother repeatedly adjusted the girl's collar, and the photographer noticed marks on the girl's neck. He didn't ask about them, but wrote that the marks on someone so young troubled the conscience. Another record showed that in January 1891, Etienne had paid Farrow for a private commission requiring discretion. Vivian requested the glass negatives from that month. Going through them one by one, she found a plate labeled only Private Commission 127. It showed a small girl, about 5 or 6, standing against a plain background. Her hair was tangled, and she looked thin and frightened. The scars on her neck were clearly visible. M7J. This was Marie Claire, before she lived with the Beaumont family. Vivian then drove to Plaquemines Parish. The courthouse clerk, Dorothy, had prepared the records for her. The property Etienne bought had belonged to a man named Jacques Mercier, who died in 1890. A sheriff's report from that year detailed a raid on Mercier's home after neighbors complained. 3 young children had been found living there in harsh conditions. All 3 had scars, letters and numbers carved into their skin. Mercier claimed they were legally apprenticed to him, but he had no documents. The children were taken into custody. He was charged but died before trial. Vivian's heart sank as she read the report. The children were described as too young to remember their names. The scars suggested they may have been taken by different captors at even earlier ages. The report recommended investigating a larger trafficking operation. Records show the children had been moved to St. Mary's Home for Colored Children in New Orleans. The intake log from November 1890 listed 3 children, including a girl about 6 with markings M7J. Letters between the orphanage and authorities showed staff begging for a real investigation, believing the children had been kidnapped by a criminal network. The police response dismissed those concerns and suggested the children were probably orphans taken in by Mercier with good intentions. There was no further investigation. Even with the scars and the harsh conditions the children had been found in, officials still insisted there was nothing more to investigate. Etienne Beaumont refused to accept that. Vivian later found letters he had written to sheriffs across Louisiana asking about missing children and whether anyone recognized the marking patterns. One sheriff in St. James Parish replied in 1891. He described a case from 1888 when a 3-year-old girl named Clara disappeared from a church picnic. She was never found, but similar markings were seen on a child at a work camp upriver. When the camp was raided, most children had already been moved, leaving only 2 boys who were too shaken to speak. Vivian spent a week reviewing missing child reports from 1885 to 1890. Dozens of young children had vanished, mostly from struggling rural families. Many cases were barely investigated. When children were recovered from illegal labor sites, they were placed in orphanages instead of returned to their families. The markings suggested a system. M7J likely meant something. The M possibly for Mercier, the number for order, the final letter for an additional category. She then found a federal report from 1892 outlining a wider kidnapping network across the South. Hundreds of children had been taken and forced to work in remote areas. Local authorities rarely pursued charges, often because the families lacked the power to demand justice. The investigation was closed due to lack of cooperation. At the Amistad Research Center, Vivian uncovered Etienne's journal from 1890 to 1895. One entry from November 1890 described his heartbreak over the 3 children rescued in Plaquemines Parish, stolen, marked, and unable to recall their families. Authorities felt nothing more could be done. Etienne wrote that he and his wife Josephine had been given resources and a voice, and he intended to use both to help. His entries showed how he searched Mercier's property and found hidden ledgers listing children, dates, and buyers. He copied everything and sent it to federal officials. Another entry from January 1891 described meeting Marie Claire at St. Mary's Orphanage. She was called Number 7, small and quiet, with sad eyes. When she touched the scar on her neck, she whispered, "Mama." Mercier's ledger said she had been taken near Thibodeau in July 1887, when she was about 2. The seller, listed as Dupont, was likely using a false name. H.N. wrote to Lafourche Parish asking about missing children. He searched for months, even locating the families of the other 2 rescued children, but no one recognized Marie Claire. The trail ended. In March 1891, he wrote that he and Josephine would adopt her, give her a home, and tell her the truth when she was old enough. Vivian's research shifted when she heard from a descendant, Margaret Thibodeau. Together they reviewed old family letters. Among them were letters between Josephine and a nun from St. Mary's. A letter from 1897 revealed that a woman named Claudine had come searching for a daughter taken in 1887. She described a crescent-shaped birthmark and remembered a man called Dupont. Sister Marie believed she might be Marie Claire's mother and gave her Josephine's address. Josephine wrote that when Claudine arrived, Marie Claire ran to her, saying she was a woman from her dreams. Claudine stayed for several days and shared her story being held on a remote farm, escaping in 1889, and saving every dollar to search for her child. She found her after 8 long years. Marie Claire embraced both mothers, learned her past, inspired others, and sparked new searches as Vivian shared the long-hidden truth.